It began with a sound no one expected to hear, the slow grind of steel shifting under 70 years of silence. Deep beneath the frozen soil of northern Poland, archaeologists uncovered a hidden vault, walls reinforced with iron, floors slick with condensation, and a single insignia stamped into the concrete, the eagle of the Third Reich. Inside were files sealed in wax, fragments of machinery, and reels of decaying film that hadn't seen light since 1945. As cameras rolled, the air thickened with the weight of history, because this wasn't just another bunker. It was evidence of an operation erased from every known record, a secret that outlived the war itself. Chapter 1: Shadows Before the Storm. In the years before the world fell apart, Europe was holding its breath. The late 1930s carried a strange quiet, the kind that comes before thunder. Cities hummed with life, but tension drifted beneath the surface. In Berlin, loudspeakers echoed speeches promising renewal and destiny. In London, the papers spoke of diplomacy, of hope stretched thin across oceans. And in the streets of Warsaw, families still gathered around shop windows, unaware that their city sat on the edge of history's darkest turn. Factories roared again after the Depression. Trains rattled through the heart of the continent carrying coal, steel, and fear. Borders hardened, armies swelled. But for most, life continued. Children playing in courtyards, farmers mending fences, radio voices whispering promises of peace. It was a fragile illusion, held together by exhaustion and denial. The world had already seen one great war. No one wanted another. Yet beneath the speeches and parades, the machinery of conflict was already turning. Intelligence agencies exchanged coded telegrams. Military attachés reported strange movements along rivers and rail lines. Governments smiled in public, but drew contingency maps behind closed doors. In the summer of 1938, the Munich Agreement was hailed as a triumph. "Peace for our time," Chamberlain declared, waving the paper before cheering crowds. But in hidden offices across Europe, the handwriting on that paper was read differently. To some, it was the moment war became inevitable. To others, it was simply a stay of execution. Ordinary citizens sensed something shifting. A mother in Vienna wrote in her diary, "The air feels heavier this year. Everyone listens for things that haven't happened yet." Newspapers carried photographs of soldiers in spotless uniforms, proud, confident, assured of destiny. But on the inside pages, tucked between advertisements for soap and cinema, were quiet notices. Conscription begins next month. Across the Atlantic, America watched and waited. Factories retooled for defense production, even as isolationist voices insisted that Europe's quarrels were not America's to solve. Franklin Roosevelt spoke cautiously, aware that memories of the Great War still haunted his citizens. But he also knew what silence could cost. In the Far East, Japan was expanding its empire through fire and fear. China burned, cities fell, and the League of Nations, once a promise of unity, stood powerless. The world map was changing, one province at a time, and every border drawn in ink seemed destined to be redrawn in blood. Inside Germany, the transformation was complete. The Nazi regime had rebuilt the nation's pride on foundations of fear. Children recited oaths before classrooms adorned with banners. Scientists were pressed into service for national research, often without the right to refuse. Rumors spread of hidden facilities, underground laboratories, remote testing fields, projects that defied imagination. Few questioned where the money or manpower came from. Those who did often vanished. And yet, among the ordinary, the bakers, the mechanics, the students, life persisted with astonishing resilience. Letters still spoke of love. Music played in crowded halls. People dreamed of normal days, but somewhere deep down, they sensed that time was running out. By the spring of 1939, the illusion cracked. German troops crossed into Prague, shattering every diplomatic pretense left standing. Britain and France issued warnings they knew would be ignored. The lines were drawn, though the world still pretended not to see them. In archives and offices across Europe, paper trails began to multiply. Orders, reports, memos stamped geheim. Secret. Historians would later call it mobilization. But to those who lived it, it was something colder. Inevitability. And so, the world waited. Radios buzzed with speculation, headlines grew bolder, and people began counting miles to the nearest border. Soldiers drilled in muddy fields under grey skies. The scent of oil, metal, and rain clung to the air. No one yet knew how far the darkness would spread, but in the silence before war, one thing was already certain. The next conflict would not just be fought with bullets and bombs. It would be waged in laboratories, in intelligence rooms, and in the minds of men willing to hide the truth for victory. In forgotten corners of Europe, projects already had names: Project Morgenlicht, Operation Tidefall, Die Glocke. Each was buried beneath layers of secrecy, protected by men who understood that some wars never truly end, they only change shape. As Europe tilted toward chaos, those who built the coming storm were already preparing what would survive it. And somewhere in northern Poland, blueprints were drawn for a structure so secure it might outlast even the Reich itself. A place built not for defense, but for disappearance. The world didn't know it then, but history was already being sealed underground. Chapter 2. The Architects of Secrecy. When war finally came, it came with precision. Not the chaotic rush of old battlefields, but the calculated rhythm of a machine long in the making. On September 1st, 1939, German troops stormed into Poland. Bombers filled the sky before dawn, their engines droning like a swarm of steel locusts. Civilians woke to the sound of sirens, to the trembling of glass, to a world forever changed. Behind the roar of invasion, another war began. One fought in shadows. As armies advanced, scientists, engineers, and intelligence officers were given new orders: secure knowledge, protect discoveries, and destroy what must never fall into enemy hands. It was here, in these early months, that the foundation for the hidden bunker beneath northern Poland was laid. In Berlin, the Reich's top scientists met under flickering lights, their conference rooms guarded by men in black uniforms. They spoke in code: technological contingencies, strategic continuity, phrases that sounded harmless but carried dangerous intent. Among them was Dr. Wilhelm Krüger, an engineer obsessed with magneto-electric propulsion. His reports, buried deep in later archives, spoke of devices capable of altering radar signatures, of vessels invisible to enemy detection. Projects like these, the records noted, were vital to the future of the Reich. But Krüger wasn't alone. The war drew the brightest and darkest minds into its orbit: physicists from Göttingen, chemists from Dresden, and cryptographers from the Abwehr, all bound by fear, ambition, or survival. Many didn't believe in ideology, they believed in momentum. The war gave them resources beyond imagination, and in return demanded silence. Joseph Goebbels called it the intellectual front. Scientists were soldiers, their laboratories the new trenches. Each experiment was a weapon, each calculation a potential victory. Those who hesitated were replaced, those who failed were forgotten. As the Wehrmacht swept across Europe, the machine of secrecy expanded. In occupied territories, German intelligence established scientific acquisition units. Their job was simple: confiscate every technical patent, laboratory notebook, or prototype that might strengthen the Reich. What couldn't be moved was destroyed. What could be hidden was, meanwhile, in the West. Allied intelligence was listening. In London, a young codebreaker named Peter Marlowe scribbled notes in the damp basement of Bletchley Park. He would later recall intercepting strange transmissions, short bursts of encrypted German data with unusual patterns. It wasn't troop movement, he wrote. It was something else, something being tested. The signals stopped abruptly after 1941. Farther east, the Soviet NKVD pursued its own secrets. Stalin's orders were clear: anything the Germans built, Russia would build stronger. Teams of engineers followed behind the Red Army's advance, scavenging abandoned facilities. Some were genuine research sites, others were traps, decoys planted by German counterintelligence to mislead their pursuers. As the war deepened, the pressure to innovate became a matter of survival. Jet propulsion, atomic research, long-range communications, each breakthrough pulled humanity further into a new kind of warfare. For some, the pace was intoxicating. For others, it was madness. In 1943, the Reich launched Project Nornir, a classified directive to construct deep underground installations across Eastern Europe. Officially, they were to serve as emergency depots. Unofficially, they were something else. Surviving fragments of the order describe research containment chambers, vaulted observation galleries, and secured specimen storage. Whatever was being built, it was meant to endure, to remain unseen long after the Reich itself was gone. Witnesses recalled convoys of trucks moving through the forests north of Torun, always at night, their headlights blacked out. Locals were forbidden from entering the area. Workers were brought in under armed guard, and most were never seen again. One Polish farmer, interviewed decades later, described hearing the sound of drilling that never stopped, day or night, even through the winter. Inside the Reich's command circles, paranoia grew. The Allies were gaining ground, and whispers of defeat spread quietly among officers. Yet the bunker projects continued. Speer himself approved additional funding, calling them infrastructure investments for future contingencies. Those contingencies, historians now believe, were never about the war itself. They were about what would come after, the preservation of technology, data, and people valuable enough to rewrite history if recovered. And so, as the front collapsed and cities burned, freight trains carried sealed containers eastward. Markings on the manifests read, Technisches Material, Hochgeheim, technical material, top secret. Not all made it. Allied bombers destroyed many en route, but some reached their destination, a vast underground complex near the shores of Lake Vättern, and others rumoured beneath the forests of northern Poland. By early 1945, the Reich was dying. Berlin was a ruin, its streets filled with refugees and soldiers too young to shave. Yet deep beneath the ground, generators still hummed. Equipment was catalogued, blueprints packed, and archives sealed in concrete. Witnesses later recalled the command given in those final days. Leave no trace visible to the victors. And they didn't. When the Red Army finally swept through, they found empty corridors and scorched papers. Whatever had been hidden was buried deeper still. Stalin's engineers searched for weeks before sealing the entrances with dynamite. Then, as years passed, maps were redrawn, memories faded, and the earth reclaimed its secrets. But in Berlin's last surviving reports, one line remains unredacted. Objective secured. Continuation phase initiated upon directive. No historian has ever found what continuation meant. Yet, the discovery beneath Polish soil in 2022 suggests that the directive was carried out, and that some part of the Reich's vision survived, waiting in silence for the right moment to be found. For those who built the bunker, the war was not the end. It was only the beginning of a much longer concealment. Chapter 3. The Vault of Silence, Winter, 1945. The Reich was crumbling, and yet the work continued. The forest north of Torun was buried in snow, its trees heavy and silent beneath the weight of ice. From above, nothing moved, but beneath the frozen ground, deep in the newly completed tunnels of Project Nornir, men still laboured under flickering lamps. They were exhausted, starving, terrified. Conscripted workers and engineers brought in under SS Guard to finish what their commanders called the insurance of history. The air was damp, filled with the metallic echo of drills and the stink of diesel. Along the walls, markings in chalk-outlined corridors that snaked toward a central vault. One room contained crates stamped with eagles and lightning bolts. Another filled with strange coiled machinery packed in straw. The guards didn't understand what they were protecting. They only knew the orders. No one leaves. No one speaks. Dr. Wilhelm Krüger, now gaunt and hollow-eyed, signed the final construction report on February 9, 1945. His diary, found decades later in fragments, recorded a single line that historians have debated ever since. It is finished. The silence will protect us. Outside, artillery rolled closer each night. The front was collapsing faster than anyone had imagined. Convoys of refugees clogged the roads heading west. Somewhere between the chaos and the command to retreat, a decision was made. The bunker was to be sealed. Inside, the final phase began. Technicians flooded the corridors with concrete dust, welding shut steel doors and dismantling elevator shafts. Before dawn, Krüger ordered his staff to burn every exposed document not packed inside the vault. Witnesses later said the smoke from the fires seeped through the vents, turning the snow above a faint shade of grey. As the last train left Torun, a platoon of SS guards stayed behind. Their orders were clear: protect the installation until final confirmation. When Soviet artillery began landing within miles of the site, they detonated the charges. The forest erupted, trees snapped, soil rained down, and an entire entrance collapsed inward. Then silence. For decades, that silence held, but in the war's final months, the Allies had intercepted a series of encrypted transmissions. American intelligence labeled them ghost traffic. The signals originated near Gdansk, then vanished somewhere beneath the forest belt. Analysts couldn't decrypt them in time. After the war, the Soviet Union occupied the area, declaring it restricted for environmental research. No civilians. Entered for 70 years, until 2022, before discovery began by accident. A group of Polish and Swedish archaeologists studying Cold War relics near the border picked up metallic anomalies on deep scan radar. The readings showed perfect symmetry underground, not like natural rock. At first they assumed it was a Cold War bunker, but the alignment was older, much older. When the first drilling probe broke through, a rush of stale air hissed upward, dry, chemical, and ancient. Cameras lowered into the shaft revealed corridors sealed by reinforced steel. The markings, barely visible under rust, matched the pattern used by the Wehrmacht's construction division in 1944. Within weeks, the excavation expanded under government supervision. What they found changed the course of modern military history. The vault's first chamber contained rows of containers, airtight, each labeled in fading Gothic script. Inside, reels of 16mm film, vacuum tubes, metallurgical samples, and folders of technical drawings. Many bore signatures of scientists once listed as missing in 1945. But it wasn't just the artifacts. The deeper teams went, the stranger the architecture became. The walls curved inward, lined with what appeared to be copper conduits, as if the structure had been designed to conduct energy rather than resist it. A central chamber, nearly 40 meters wide, was filled with machinery, unlike anything in the Reich's official archives. Among the debris lay fragments of glass, shattered yet oddly resistant to corrosion. Testing later showed traces of hafnium and thorium, elements associated with high-energy research. Some of the devices appeared to resemble magnetic field generators, though no record of their design exists in wartime patents. Forensic analysis dated the air inside the vault to the mid-1940s. The machinery had never been powered since, yet on one wall, a small generator stood intact, its fuel lines still sealed. When powered under controlled conditions, the device emitted a faint electromagnetic pulse, too weak to be a weapon, too precise to be accidental. The bunker's layout was deliberate, defensive. Corridors curved like labyrinths, designed to confuse intruders or contain something within. Even now, the purpose of its construction remains partly a mystery. As the media learned of the discovery, governments scrambled to claim jurisdiction. Germany denied involvement. Russia called it Soviet-era misinformation. The United States sent observers under the pretense of historical cooperation. Within days, parts of the site were reclassified and closed to the public. But the data collected before the lockdown was enough. Among the documents recovered was a partial manifest, handwritten and stamped with Kruger's insignia. The final entry read, "Asset secured, transit impossible, preservation phase enacted." No one knows what the asset was. The next page was missing, torn cleanly from the binding. In the footage captured by the excavation team before access was revoked, one image stands out. A long, dim hallway ending in a sealed bulkhead door. Stenciled across the metal, nearly erased by rust, were 3 words in German. Nicht öffnen, Fortsetzung folgt, do not open. Continuation follows. When the footage aired briefly online, it vanished within hours. The site was declared restricted due to contamination. But those who were there, the archaeologists, the technicians, the camera crew, speak of what they heard before the final blackout. A low, mechanical hum, not the echo of equipment, not the sound of settling metal, something still alive, buried deep beneath decades of silence. Whatever was sealed in that vault was never meant to be found. And yet, we found it. The question that haunts investigators now isn't what the bunker was built to protect. It's why someone went to such extraordinary lengths to keep it breathing. Long after the war had ended, the vault had waited 77 years, and when it was opened, history exhaled. Chapter 4: Ashes and Echoes. When the lights of the vault went dark again, the world above was already stirring with whispers. The story leaked, then vanished, then resurfaced as rumor. Governments issued denials, but the silence only deepened the mystery. Beneath the politics and secrecy, though, lay something simpler. A realization that what had been unearthed was not just metal or machinery, but memory. The war had ended 80 years ago, yet somehow it was still speaking. Historians, engineers, journalists all sought fragments of the truth. A few of the original excavation crew agreed to interviews. Their accounts, though inconsistent in detail, shared one constant: a sense of unease. It wasn't the darkness, one archaeologist said softly. It was the feeling that someone had planned for us to be there, that this discovery was part of the design. By late 2022, the site was sealed under joint Polish-European oversight. Officially, the reason was contamination. Unofficially, it was fear. Analysis of several recovered canisters revealed traces of experimental isotopes, materials used in early radar research, but refined to an impossible degree for the 1940s. Scientists from Sweden and the UK verified the samples, then withdrew without comment. In the months that followed, a small archive opened in Warsaw to catalogue the recovered documents. Inside that archive, under controlled temperature and light, lay hundreds of reels of film, many too decayed to project. What could be restored revealed images both haunting and banal. Men in white coats adjusting dials, schematics chalked on concrete walls, crates marked for shipment to coordinates now erased from maps. But the most striking footage was from the final days of the war. On a grainy reel, a camera pans across a line of trucks driving through the forest at night. The headlights are covered, the convoy disappears into fog. A date flashes on the edge of the film, April 7th, 1945. Then, just before the reel ends, the faint outline of a metal door closing, identical to the one unearthed in 2022. The film was labelled Tidefall, continuation record. No one can confirm whether that label came from wartime or from later archiving. But for those who watched it, the implication was clear. The bunker was not a shelter, it was a transfer point. Meanwhile, locals in the surrounding villages remembered the stories passed down by their grandparents, of lights in the woods, of soldiers speaking German long after the area was supposed to be liberated. One man recalled his father's words. "We thought the war was over, but some of them never left." The deeper historians dug, the more they realized that the Reich's hidden infrastructure had not simply vanished with defeat. Across Europe, sealed tunnels and buried labs were still being found. In Norway, in the Czech mountains, beneath the Baltic coast. Each one whispered the same truth. The war's end had been more of a pause than an ending. The people who lived through those years had carried the scars quietly. Survivors of forced labor camps later identified sketches from the recovered documents, ventilation systems, freight lifts, designs they had built without ever knowing their purpose. For them, the rediscovery of Project Nornir reopened wounds long buried. "We thought our suffering was for victory or defeat," one survivor wrote in a letter. "Now I see it was for silence." The psychological toll of that realization rippled outward. Historians spoke of the archaeology of trauma, how each unearthed artifact forced a new reckoning. The war's dead had long been buried, but their inventions, their fears, their ambitions, those remained. And in unearthing them, we unearthed ourselves. Governments moved quickly to control the narrative. Press releases spoke of research integrity and public safety, while defense agencies quietly dispatched analysts to examine the vault's remains. The term strategic legacy assets appeared in leaked documents, bureaucratic language for discoveries too valuable or too dangerous to disclose. For months, access to the site was limited to rotating teams under military escort. The archaeologists who started the excavation were replaced by engineers in unmarked uniforms. Then, the cameras were removed. The fencing went up. The silence returned. Yet not everyone was willing to let the story die. A young historian named Anya Kowalska, who had worked on the initial dig, began collecting testimonies and satellite imagery. Her notes described strange activity weeks after the lockdown. Cargo shipments, temporary power grids, new tunnels extending beyond the mapped perimeter. She sent her findings to multiple news outlets before vanishing from public contact in early 2023. Her final email, recovered later, contained only a single line: "The continuation is active." By then, the story had moved on. The world returned to its noise, new wars, new crises. But for those who had seen the vault, the memory remained. It wasn't just about Germany or Poland or the war. It was about the thin line between remembering and repeating, about how easily truth can be buried and how it always, eventually, finds air again. In the small museum built near the site months later, visitors walk through an exhibit called Ashes and Echoes. It's quiet inside. Dimly lit corridors lead to a replica of the vault door, cold metal, faded lettering. On a plaque nearby, a single sentence reads, "History never disappears. It waits." Some nights, the staff swear they hear a faint hum behind the display, like distant machinery coming back to life. Most say it's imagination, the echo of their own heartbeat in the silence. But others aren't so sure. Outside, the forest has regrown. Wind rustles through the trees, carrying the same cold air that once filled the tunnels below. And beneath the soil, deep under the roots and the stone, the vault still sleeps, sealed and silent. But silence, as history proves, is never forever. Chapter 5. The Weight of What Remains. Time has a way of softening the edges of history until something buried refuses to stay silent. The discovery of the vault beneath northern Poland did more than reopen a piece of World War II. It tore open a question humanity has never stopped asking. How much of our progress was born from secrecy, and how much from conscience? In the years after the excavation, the official story grew quieter, press releases faded. The site was redrawn on maps as restricted forestry zone. Most of the researchers moved on to other projects, other continents. Yet for those who stood inside that bunker, those who breathed its heavy, stagnant air, the experience never left. It lingered like an echo. Dr. Katarina Lindholm, one of the first engineers on site, later wrote in her private journal, "We didn't uncover history. We trespassed on it. And when you trespass on something built to be hidden, you feel it watching you." Her words struck a chord. Because the story of Project Nornir wasn't just about lost technology or wartime paranoia. It was about the cost of control. The way nations build walls not only to protect themselves from enemies, but from their own truths. In the decades following World War II, both East and West inherited the same instinct. To hide what frightened them, to erase what couldn't be explained, to silence what might unravel the carefully constructed myth of victory. The bunker was proof that those instincts were older than the Cold War. Born in the dying hours of the Reich, carried forward in every secret laboratory and sealed archive since. For some, the rediscovery of the vault became a kind of mirror. Journalists, historians, even former intelligence officers began to question how many classified projects from their own nations would someday be found beneath the soil. How many secrets are still humming quietly in the dark? British analyst once said, "The past isn't buried, it's encrypted." The phrase became a headline, then a rallying cry for those demanding the release of wartime archives still sealed under national security laws. But even as files were opened, entire sections remained redacted, names removed, coordinates missing, as if history itself was being edited in real time. Yet, amid the secrecy, there were moments of clarity, stories of ordinary people touched by the rediscovery. In Torun, an elderly man named Jan Nowak brought a box of rusted tools to the museum, claiming they belonged to his father, who had worked on a German site in the forest as a young labourer. Inside the box were hand-sketched ventilation designs identical to those in the vault. Jan's voice trembled as he said, "He used to tell me the ground would hum when the machines ran." That human thread, the lived memory, turned the discovery from a story of technology into a story of conscience. The question wasn't just what the Nazis had built, but why such knowledge was preserved so carefully, protected even from defeat. Some suggested it was simply scientific ambition. Others believed it was an attempt to ensure that the Reich's vision of progress, unbound by morality, could one day return. And maybe that's why the vault still matters. Because it forces us to look at how easily good intentions become instruments of control, how innovation can outlive ideology. It reminds us that silence, when used as a shield, can be just as dangerous as war itself. Modern nations still hide what they fear the world will not understand. Files on Cold War experiments, biological tests, nuclear miscalculations, all tucked away, marked top secret until the future decides it's safe to remember. The vault beneath Poland is simply the oldest whisper of that pattern, a shadow of the same instinct that still drives governments today. But not all stories can be contained. A single photograph, a misfiled document, a sonar scan. That's all it takes to turn rumor into revelation. And when history breathes again, it does so with a vengeance. In the quiet of that forest, a new generation walks the same trails where convoys once moved under moonlight. The air is still heavy with that same cold scent of iron and earth. Visitors stop before the replica door at the museum, tracing the faded words with their fingers. Nicht öffnen. Fortsetzung folgt. Do not open. Continuation follows, and they wonder. Continuation of what? Maybe it was a warning, maybe a promise, or maybe just a cruel irony, that history, no matter how deeply buried, always finds a way to continue. The vault remains sealed now, covered by soil and silence once more, but beneath it lies a truth larger than any artifact. That every age has its secrets, every empire its hidden rooms, every victory its shadow. And as the camera pans away, the forest fades into dusk. Wind moves through the trees like breath. The hum is gone, but its memory lingers. Steady, faint, eternal. Because the real legacy of war isn't just what was destroyed, it's what was never meant to be found.